Imagine this. You bake your neighbor a homemade apple pie just to ask for a little kindness. 3 days later, he shoves that same pie back on your doorstep, half eaten, crawling with ants, and a note that says, I changed my mind. What would you do? Most people would give up. But my grandmother, she waited 30 years, and her revenge was legendary. If you've ever had a horrible neighbor, this story will give you chills. Hit that like button, subscribe, and let's dive into one of the most satisfying revenge stories you'll ever hear. Back in 1962, my grandmother's life seemed straight out of a picture book. She married a young man in the military, handsome, disciplined, and determined. Their parents wanted to give them the best possible start, so they bought the newlyweds a home in a quiet suburb. Picture it: white picket fence, freshly cut lawn, neighbors waving from their porches. It was the American dream. But every dream has a shadow, and in their case, it came in the form of the man who moved in next door. At first, he seemed harmless. He was just another homeowner settling in. One spring morning, he dug a hole right along the edge of his property, right next to my grandparents' driveway, and planted a small mulberry tree. Nobody thought much of it. After all, what harm could one little tree cause? But mulberry trees, they're not harmless. They're messy, invasive, and attract swarms of birds. And this little seedling was about to grow into a decades-long nightmare. 15 years went by. The tree grew and grew. Its branches stretched wide, heavy with berries. Birds flocked to it by the dozens, stuffing themselves until they could barely fly. And when birds eat mulberries, they poop mulberries. If you've never seen what that does to cars, it's a nightmare. The droppings are acidic and sticky, leaving deep stains and destroying paint jobs. My grandfather would scrub for hours, but the stains never fully disappeared. Every car parked in their driveway was ruined. At first, my grandmother tried to laugh it off, but deep down, she was seething. The driveway was theirs. The damage was happening on their property. And yet, nothing could be done, because technically, the tree wasn't theirs to touch. Now, my grandmother wasn't the kind of woman to start fights. She believed in kindness, in handling things the polite way. So, one sunny afternoon, she rolled up her sleeves, baked a beautiful golden apple pie, the kind that filled the house with cinnamon and warmth, and carried it next door. When the neighbor opened the door, she smiled, handed him the pie, and said softly, I don't mean to be a bother, but the branches of your mulberry tree are hanging over our driveway. The cars are getting damaged. Would you mind trimming them back? Just a little? The neighbor grinned. Don't worry, he said. I'll get to it soon. Relieved, my grandmother went home, believing the problem was solved. But 3 days later, she opened her front door to find something that made her blood run cold. There it was, the same pie plate she had so lovingly delivered, shoved onto her doorstep. The pie was half eaten, swarming with ants, and on top, a note scrawled in messy handwriting, I changed my mind. That moment broke something inside my grandmother. She wasn't just angry, she was humiliated. The apple pie wasn't just dessert. It was her way of saying, I respect you, I'm trying to be a good neighbor. And he had thrown it back in her face. Her hands shook as she threw the ant-covered pie into the trash. Her cheeks burned with rage. And in that moment, she swore to herself, one day, one way or another, I will get him back. But for now, she was trapped. The city ordinance was clear. Since the tree's roots were on his property, the entire tree legally belonged to him. If she touched a single branch, she could be fined. So year after year, she asked again, pleaded again, always politely, always with hope that maybe he'd finally listen. But every single time his answer was the same. Sometimes it was a smirk and a smug no, other times a sharp, nasty "fuck it off." And each rejection cut her a little deeper. By the mid-1990s, my grandmother had lived with this torment for over 30 years, but life had changed. She had just retired after 35 years of hard work, and her company rewarded her with a massive bonus. For the first time, she had money to spend however she pleased, and instead of letting that money sit in the bank, she saw her chance. This wasn't just about a tree anymore, it was about respect, about dignity, about decades of being treated like she didn't matter. So she did something bold. She bought the empty lot on the other side of the neighbor's property, and then, with the precision of a general plotting a war, she went to a nursery and ordered 16, yes, 16 mulberry trees. One by one, she planted them along her property line. 8 on one side of the neighbor's lot, 8 on the other. A living, growing army of berry-bearing, bird-attracting, paint-ruining revenge. For years, those trees grew taller, stronger, messier. Birds descended like a storm every summer. His cars were coated in purple droppings. His driveway looked like a battlefield. And the irony, he couldn't complain, because the exact same city ordinance that had once protected him now protected my grandmother. Her trees were hers, untouchable. He had built his kingdom on arrogance, and now he was surrounded by the very same nightmare he had forced onto her. But bullies don't like being beaten at their own game. About 3 years ago, after nearly a decade of suffering, the neighbor finally snapped. Late one night, when no one was watching, he grabbed his tools and hacked down every single one of my grandmother's mulberry trees. Branches everywhere. Stumps where her beautiful trees once stood. For him, it must have felt like victory, but he had no idea what storm was coming. My grandmother didn't scream. She didn't cry. She called her lawyer. When the case hit the courtroom, the neighbor tried to play dumb. He claimed the trees were a nuisance, that he was doing the neighborhood a favor. But the evidence was clear. Those trees were on her land. Cutting them was illegal. And here's where karma twisted the knife. See, the court doesn't value trees at the price you bought them. Number. They value them at their mature price. And these weren't baby trees anymore. They were over a decade old, grown, thriving, and worth far more than what she had paid. The judge's gavel slammed down. You are ordered to reimburse her for the trees at full mature value. The neighbor's face went pale. His arrogance crumbled. After decades of mocking her, dismissing her, humiliating her, now he had to pay thousands upon thousands of dollars directly into her pocket. For my grandmother, it wasn't just about the money. It was about finally winning. About proving that kindness isn't weakness, that patience, persistence, and a little bit of strategy can topple even the most stubborn bully. And as she walked out of that courtroom, head held high, there was a smile on her face that said everything. Checkmate? So what's the lesson here? Maybe it's this. Don't mistake someone's kindness for weakness, because the people you underestimate are the ones who can destroy you in ways you never see coming. If this story gave you chills, smash that like button and subscribe for more real-life revenge stories. And tell me in the comments, what's the worst neighbor you've ever had to deal with? I'll be reading your stories.